Okay, so these notes are going to go on page 35. Okay, so make sure that you have your table of contents set up. Okay, today we're learning about rotations. So far we've learned about translations and reflections. Okay, remember, translation, that was a slide. Okay, reflection was a flip. What do you guys think of when I say rotation? Turn, okay? Good. So, let's go ahead and get a formal, like, math kind of definition for rotation. Okay, so what is a rotation? We say it is a turn, or another word we can use is spin, about a fixed point. Okay. Oh, sorry, I forgot to write the word. Rotation. Okay, so rotation is a turn or spin around or about a fixed point. Okay. Now, when we are rotating an object, we also have something called the center of rotation. It's important to know where our center of rotation is, where I'm turning the shape, the point that I'm turning the shape about. Okay, so the center of rotation is the point that we are rotating the figure around. Okay, and then the last important, like, key definition is the angle of rotation. Okay, the angle of rotation is the angle that's created by the pre-image the center of rotation and the image. Okay. Now, for the purpose of rotation, we're mostly going to be dealing with rotation in the coordinate plane. Okay, so when we're rotating the coordinate plane, normally we're rotating increments of 90. So like 90, 180, what's 180 plus 90? 270, what's 270 plus 90? 360, okay? So we're typically dealing with angles of rotation like 90, 180, 270, so forth, okay? All right, now, there's another important thing, which is the direction that we choose to rotate, okay? So, we could either rotate clockwise or counterclockwise. So, clockwise, everyone draw a clock, means that we're rotating the way the clock goes. Okay? So which way does the hand turn on the clock? to the right. Like if time is moving on, the hand's going this direction, right? So that's a clockwise rotation. Okay. Now, the opposite of this is called, counterclockwise, which means the opposite of the way the clock turns. Okay, so draw another clock. And this time it's going like backwards, like if your clock was broken and it was going backwards. Okay? Sometimes we abbreviate clockwise with CW, and we abbreviate counterclockwise with CCW. Okay? Okay. And then last, we're going to go over some rules for rotation, okay? Because there's two ways that you guys could choose to rotate. One is using trace paper and doing the rotation manually with the trace paper, okay? The other way to rotate is by using a coordinate rule, okay, which we're going to go over the rules. Okay, so we're going to draw like a rule box over here for our rules. Okay, so 90 degrees counterclockwise. Okay, the rule for this rotation is the original X and Y are going to switch positions and the Y becomes negative. Okay, 180 degree rotation. The rule is the original X and Y are going to stay in the same position, but their coordinates become negative. Cute. And then a 270 degree rotation counterclockwise. Original coordinates are going to change places, but the X becomes negative. Okay, now I know right now all this is kind of confusing. It'll make more sense once we get into the examples, okay? I just want you to have it written down for when we get to the examples. Okay, so let's look at example number 2. Okay, it says draw the image of the figure under the given rotation. Rotation 180 degrees about the origin. Okay, so let's take our trace paper. Let's trace over the X and the Y axis. Okay, so I've gone ahead and I've traced that over, right? Now it's telling me to rotate 180 degrees about the origin. Okay, but I told you guys we need to know a direction in order to rotate, right? It told me it wants me to rotate about the origin, so the origin is my fixed point that I'm rotating around. Where is the origin? The center where the X and the Y axis meet, right? Okay, so I want to rotate around this point 180 degrees, but I'm not sure which direction to go. So let's just see what happens if I go to the right. That would be going clockwise. Okay, so far that's 90 degree turn. Does that make sense? Okay, let's let's turn it one more time. That would mean 180 degrees. So look, there it is. There's 180 degrees if I went clockwise. Okay. But I'm not sure which way they wanted me to go. So let me go back and see what happens if I do the other way. What happens if I go counterclockwise? Here's 90. There's 180. What happened? Same thing. So whenever you have a 180 degree rotation, doesn't matter which direction you go, it's going to end up in the same place, and that's why they never specify. Okay? So 180 degree rotation doesn't matter, counterclockwise or clockwise, it's the same thing. Okay? So let's go ahead and gently lift up our paper and write down where our primes ended up. There was X prime, Q prime, and did I get that in the right spot? Okay, P prime. And then I'm going to go ahead and trace over my outline of my shape. Okay, now remember how I was talking about these rules? How you could rotate using the rule? Okay, let's just say, for example, I just rotated this point P. What was the original coordinates of P? If I go over and up, what's P was 3, 2? What would happen if I applied this rule to P and made 3 negative and 2 negative? Where would negative 3, negative 2 be? Right there, right? Where P prime is, okay? So if I apply that rule, P prime ends up where it's supposed to end up, right? P prime ends up at negative 3, negative 2. Does that make sense? Okay. So you can do it using trace paper. You can do it using the rules. Okay. All right. Let's take a look at problem number 3. Okay. So everyone, what is it asking us to do? 90 degrees, which way? Clockwise, about the origin. Okay. So, do I have a rule up there for 90 degrees clockwise? No, I have a rule for what? Counterclockwise. Okay. So, let's go ahead and trace this one. It's an F. H. Is this an I right here? It's an I, right? Is that an I? Yes, I think so. Okay. All right. So there's my pre-image. Okay. 90 degrees clockwise would be moving that direction, right? Like if this were the hand of the clock, it would be moving this way, right? Okay. So let's see what happens when I rotate 90 degrees clockwise. Look at where my shape ends up. Right there, right? Okay, let's go ahead and graph the points. Now, I know that point looks like an H, but look where it came from. What letter was it? I, and when it rotated, I was there. Does that make sense? So that's not H that goes there. That's I prime. Okay? Does everyone follow that? The first time I did this problem, I was like, whoa, because I wrote down the letters in the wrong places. Okay? And then this last one would be H prime. Okay, is everyone following that? Okay. So now, we said we didn't have a rule for this one, but I want you guys to notice what happens with some of these points. What was the original location of point F? Like if I were to write down F's coordinates, they are 2, negative 3. Okay, what was F prime? Left 3, so negative 3, -2. Okay? So what happened with these two numbers? Did they switch places? And then the 2 became what sign? Negative. Which one of these rules does that happen in? Where the coordinates switch places, but the first number is now negative. Yeah. And so what happens is if I do a 270-degree rotation counterclockwise, take your trace paper and rotate it 90, going counterclockwise, 180, counterclockwise, 270, counterclockwise. What ends up happening? It's the same thing, right? So this 270 counterclockwise rule, this also works for 90 degrees what? 90 degrees which way? Clockwise. Okay, so you can fill that in. Okay. Now, what do you guys think is going to happen with this one? It's going to be or what? 270 clockwise, right? Because I can go 90 degrees one direction, but I end up the same place going 270 the other way. Does that make sense? Okay. So, even though we don't have a rule for these, we can use these other rules, okay? All right. Let's go ahead and take a look at this next one, 90 degrees counterclockwise about the origin. Okay, so we can either use our trace paper or we can use our rule. We have a rule. We also have trace paper. Okay, I'll just use the trace paper really quickly. Bless you. Okay, now it's telling me 90 degrees counterclockwise, which would mean backwards of the way that the clock turns. So I'm going to go ahead and spin this image backwards. There it is. That's where it ends up. That's not a U. What letter is that originally? C. Okay, S was there. And then P's over here. Okay. So there's my new figure. Now if we check one of these points with one of its primes, and we check the rule, 90 degrees counterclockwise rule, we should get that it's following the rule, right? Does that make sense there? Okay, how are we doing so far on this? Okay. All right, let's go to the bottom. Okay, we've done a few using trace paper. Now we're going to do some using our rules, okay? All right, so number 5 says a 270-degree counterclockwise rotation about the origin. Okay, 270 counterclockwise, I'm going to look up that rule at the top. It says it is x comma y turns into y comma negative x. Okay, to rotate using your rule, you're going to have to start out by listing all of your points, A, B, C, and each ordered pair for each point. So the ordered pair for A, 1, -1. The ordered pair for B, 1, +1. The ordered pair for C, 5, 3. Okay, then, to get all of our primes, we're going to go ahead and we're going to switch the place of the numbers, but the number that ends up in the second position is going to change signs. Okay? So I'm going to switch the place of the numbers. So -1 is going to go to the front. 1's going to come to the back, but the back number changes signs. So instead of being positive, it is now negative. Okay? All right, for B prime, I'm going to switch the place of the numbers. That's not hard because they're the same number. But the back number is going to change signs. So what does that now become? Negative. Okay, and for C prime, switch the place of the numbers. And the last number becomes what sign? Negative. So it's now a -5. Does that make sense? So I switched their place, and I made the last one the opposite sign. Now, if any of these numbers had originally been positive, like negative, like say this was a -5 to start with. What's the opposite of a -5? Positive. So in this case, they all change to negatives, but sometimes if you start with a negative, it will then just change to the opposite. Does that make sense? Okay, so now let's graph these points. -1, -1. 1, -1. 3, -5. Now, if you're not believing me that this rotated to the correct place, actually get out your trace paper and trace it and do the rotation manually. And then you can check and see, did it end up in the right spot? Does that make sense? So we're basically turning 90, 180, 270, right? Okay, so we're going counterclockwise, 90, 180, 270. All right? Okay, are there questions on how we did that one? No? Okay, I want you guys to try number 6 right now. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look. First, this is the rule we should have been applying, right? Look at your page, make sure you're doing this one, -y, x. Did everyone pick that rule from the box above? Okay. Now, did you list your coordinates correctly to start with? Because if we list them wrong to start with, it's going to be hard to get it right. Okay. All right, now, this rule says switch their place, but make the first part negative, or the opposite sign. So I'm going to switch their place, well, 3 and 3, switching places, right? But make this first one negative now, or opposite sign. Okay, so now I'm going to switch for S, the 5 and the 3, so 3's first now, and I'm going to make this one have an opposite sign. So it's now negative. Okay, and then switch these, switch their place, and make this one the opposite sign. Can 0 be negative or positive? No, 0 is just 0, so I don't need to worry about that. Okay, now let's go ahead and graph. Okay, so -3 up 3. Okay, so that's R prime. And -3 up 5. That's Q prime. Oh, sorry, S prime. S prime. Okay, and then 0, 3, or 0 up 3, that's Q prime. Kind of put R prime in a bad spot, huh? That's okay, though. All right. How many of you got something like that when you did your rotation? Okay. Now, again, you can do with your trace paper and check that this rotated into the correct spot. Okay, if you're not sure, you can always double check with your trace paper. Okay. All right, are there questions on what we did here? Okay, we're going to save number 7 for a warm-up tomorrow. Okay.